Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I see okay, Dr. Okere has joined us. Good morning, Dr. Okere.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very
Nice
well,
to be here.
thank you. Thank you for taking out time to join us. Okay, so I don't know, maybe 2 more minutes or we can just proceed.
I think 2 more minutes is fine.
Okay. Okay, we are 10 minutes past the hour, and I think we'll proceed from here. We would like to welcome Joachim Chijoke of the UNFPA. Thank you for taking out time to join us today. Today, we are having our webinar for today, Beyond Projects, Building Systems for Inclusive and Sustainable Impact. The idea behind the webinar is that we, as an organization, part of our mandate is to seek to reframe the general development narrative, which has to do with the fragmented donor-driven projects to integrated systems thinking and ecosystem building for inclusive growth. So our general ecosystem building philosophy and systematic reforms or systemic reform ensures that today's conversation will feature thought leaders in the field, and they represent essential pillars of systems change. So we have our speakers today have expertise in citizen accountability, governance reforms, leadership ethics, and evidence-driven policy innovation. So at the end of this webinar, our desire is that we'll explore how Nigeria can move from a project dependency to a sustainable system that is embedded in inclusivity, ethics, building sustainable, inclusive growth that grows beyond funding circles. So our agenda for today, we'll meet our panelists following this introduction. Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. There was power outage at some point, so I think my internet went off. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So today's agenda, we're meeting our panelists, housekeeping rules. We have a pre-discussion survey. The discussion, we have a Q&A session, and we just have like a brief introduction of one of the portfolios of Sociocapital, the Sociocapital Inclusive Development. So just a brief introduction. My name is Sharon Madaki. I'm the Executive Director and Corporate Head of Corporate Services for Sociocapital, and I will be anchoring this session today. And Sociocapital is a social impact organization that strengthens institutions. Our interest is transforming social system while we empower local entities so that they can drive their own form of development efforts in ways that ensures that there is inclusive growth and sustainability. Our general vision is an African society where communities are empowered and institutions are equipped to drive their own change. So our first speaker for today will be Nsikan Essien. She's a legal reform expert. She's also the head of the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable. And she specializes in law, regulatory compliance, and government affairs. Thank you, Nsikan, for joining us today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
All right. Next, we have Dr. Okere, Dr. Augustine Okere. He is a senior non-resident fellow with the NSG Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and he's also a development policy and socio-economic researcher with over 10 years experience in welfare analysis, international political economy, and sustainable development. He currently serves as a research associate with Connected Development and also a research fellow with the African Economy History Network, where he contributes to projects on democratic governance, accountability, and socioeconomic inclusion. His research explores the political economy of sustainable development, financial inclusion, social protection, and an intersection of global agendas such as the SDGs and the African Agenda 2026. And finally, we have Dr. Adewale Adeyinka, or Adeyinka Adewale. Dr. Adewale is an associate professor at the Henley Business School, and he is also a professor of leadership and ethics and entrepreneurship. He's also a member of both the Henley Center for Entrepreneurship and the Center for Business Ethics and Sustainability. He has under his, as a feather to his cap, is the founder of the African Social Innovators Network, where he serves on several boards of different organizations and charities across Africa, a published scholar and peer reviewer of leading management journals. His works have appeared in top-tier academic outlets. Welcome to this webinar, Dr. Adewale. Thank you for taking our time to join us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, quick housekeeping rules for for the participants. Please mute your mic when you're not speaking, and during the question and answer session, please raise your hand, or you can also drop the comment in the comment box. So before we go into our discussion today, we would like to have like a poll, just 3 questions for participants to answer, to let us know if they have an idea about the discussion we are having today, and then provide us with some talking points so that when the speakers are speaking during their sessions, they can address some of these salient points that may have been raised during the poll. So who is handling the slides? Please, can you start the poll? Share the poll. Linda, please. Linda, please confirm that the poll has gone out. It appears that we have a bit of a challenge launching the poll, which is a bit strange. So let's not take so much time. Let's dive straight into the discussion. So I'll be starting with you, Dr. Okere. Building systems for social impact requires uncovering deep structural experience. From your policy research experience, what are the most persistent systemic blind spots we find in Nigeria's development programs or projects that keep these projects based rather than systems driven?
Good morning once again. Thanks for having me. Sorry about the lightning where I am, but sorry, please just have to make do with it. Thank you for your question. I'd like to look at it from the perspective of how government policies is expected to drive structural changes as well as systemic changes in the country, because these policies are an offshoot of the dimensions and areas of funding with regards to development, both internally and also externally, specifically in terms of the budgetary considerations as well as the dimensions to external support for that. I will just speak maybe one or two so that other speakers can also cover some of these issues. I feel that from my experience, that in terms of properly linking policy planning with development outcomes, Nigeria is suffering within that regard. Specifically, when you consider the constant changing and flip-flop of development plans, because you cannot have wholesome development without alluding to proper planning, either in short, medium, or long-term systems or time frame. And I'll give an example of what I'm trying to indicate here. So subsequent government regimes come in, and they come in with their own development plan. Currently we are under the Renewed Hope agenda, right? But the funny thing about this Renewed Hope agenda is, have any of you seen it as a policy document? Is there a structured pathway as to how is this thing going to achieve? How the blanket statement is to increase GDP to maybe 1 trillion within a certain period. But then, apart from having it obtainable with a single document, in terms of also framework to align how this works, what are the policies in terms of development program and policies before the Renewed Hope agenda? So Nigeria has been moving from one policy agenda to another policy agenda without having a structured planning within these systems. And this also ties to our democratic process in terms of having elected officials, as well as in having political parties that are not structured along lines of proper policy that is embedded into their manifestos, that eventually when they get into power, they start implementing. The reason why this is also important is that the more these are structured and put in place, funding, budgetary considerations, as well as resources needed to drive such planning would now be the next thing to look. So if, for instance, we have like the transformation agenda that we had at one point, or even if we had the needs program or whatever it is, there is need to have it in terms of, okay, what's the long-term planning for it? So that if another government comes in and they see this plan and say, okay, yes, this is the clear pathway for Nigeria in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 50 years, everyone sticks to it. And the reason why I'm saying this is I would like to make a reference to China. China has set its course in terms of development. By 2049, by 2050, China knows where it's going. I understand in terms of the differences in terms of political context, but there is need to have this structured in countries like Nigeria, because that would align to in terms of development funding, both internally and externally. And I think I would like to just stop here, because I feel that this is one thing that kind of hinges a lot to how we look at development outcomes in the country. Thank you.
You're muted.
Okay,
Sorry. So just a quick follow on. Do you think that this is what affects the development sector when they come in with, or we say funders or philanthropies, when they come in with their funding plans and all of that? Because we find that within the development sector, you find that when funders come, they have a particular agenda they want to follow. Sometimes some focus on advocacy, some focus on health, some focus on different areas. And you find that implementing organizations, they tend to tilt towards what the funders are interested in. So the government policy at the time, or the interest of government at the time, as they continue to shift, do you think that this is what affects funders when they come in? Or do you think that they both work divergently and there is no meeting points?
Thank you for that follow-up question. So like I said in my previous introduction, while these policies are not, maybe they're in place, it also determines in terms of resources and resource mobilization towards those areas. So the clear framework for this plan, as well as plan and policies, would also determine how development funding should align with that. Like you rightly said, most development funds, either coming from multilateral or bilateral agencies, have a clear direction, a clear pathway. And the funny thing about this, in research as well as in experience, it doesn't only tie to the destination of where they are funding, it also ties to values and systems and structures back home to where the source of the fund is coming. So for instance, if Nigeria has a certain type of funding arrangement with the US, for example, via the defunct USAID, it aligns to some principles or some policy practices back home, that's in the United States. But the challenge here is that while it aligns clearly back home in terms of US in the context of example that I'm giving, how does that align with Nigeria? So today, the focus might be, okay, in terms of maternal health mortality, and the challenges around trying to ensure that women do not die while they are giving birth. But then what is Nigeria's plan in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, with regards to either improving infrastructure, improving personnel, improving systems, even improving access in terms of maternal health mortality, right? And how does this plan, in terms of its long framework and long idea, how does it align with development funding? So for instance, if USAID, the defunct USAID, aligns closely within this area, so how does this fit into that long-term plan? And the same applies to different sectors. So I think that the reason why it's necessary to consider this is because with that proper framework planning, long term, not just the normal 4 years, 8 years when someone is in power. If we have that consensus, that agreement, and then we say, okay, yes, this is where we want to go, this is where we see ourselves. Even regardless of change of political party or change of direction or dimension, it can help in terms of directing the system and pathway in terms of international development funding, coming either from bilateral or multilateral support. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Adeyinka, I'll come to you. So the team says beyond projects, and this implies that we are moving from isolated success stories to resilient ecosystems. So how can we build value-based systems where policymakers like Dr. Okere has raised, funders and social innovators can co-create sustainable impact that endures beyond just the donor circles and political transitions?
Well, thank you very much, Sharon, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Augustine, for that really insightful contribution. I was nodding in affirmation to the point you made because your submission, I think, begins to scratch the surface of some of our fundamental problems. Without a cohesive vision, it is difficult to get buy-in. Alignment is almost impossible when we don't have a cohesive vision of where we're all heading. And I think the challenge of having multiple development plans, very short-term in nature, driven around wanting to score short, small points, without really putting the welfare of multiple generations in the true spirit of sustainability in the full picture. I think it's a very sad reality that we see in our context and in our country. Now, Sharon, you're asking about building ecosystems and values-based ecosystems. In my view, a values-based ecosystem is one where knowledge, culture, ethics are treated as capital. And it's an ecosystem that mobilizes wisdom from history, wisdom from communities, and uses that wisdom to build inclusive policies. And then we foster trust in that sort of setup as well. So I take up the example that Dr. Okere put forward earlier. So let's go back to this whole notion of, say, maternal mortality, for instance. That is a big challenge in our context. We're getting supposedly some interesting donor funds coming in from, say, across the pond from Europe. I mean, we do get a lot of development funds from Europe, from America, and now we're getting some coming in from the Middle East as well, and China through the BRI, which we all know, the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on. So there's a lot of these monies coming in. My challenge is these monies coming in with vis-a-vis the active involvement of investors, the private sector, and all the other ecosystem stakeholders that are within our context and within our polity. How do we begin to bridge the gap between the donor funds coming in as maybe a way to systematize knowledge, to gain understanding, and then to begin to build the kind of foundations upon which private sector investors can then take that onward and begin to move to build more sustainable businesses of the future now, or impact of the future. Now, the challenge here is that we continue to revolve around the vicious circle. I think, and I know, development economists on this call will probably have mixed feelings on this, but here's my take on it. I think that development and donor funds have done us more damage than good. We agree to the fact that the monies coming in have sedated our innovation capacity. It has sedated our ability to actually see beyond the money. So we are now living on handouts. And I can say that quite confidently because part of my job with the Africa Research Center here at the Henley Business School has put me right in the very middle of the Europe-Africa relations. So I go to Brussels almost every other month to go and have conversations with the EU governments. And then I'm coming into forums like this and I'm speaking to my brothers and sisters in Africa. And I'm sort of caught in this dilemma between how they are seeing Africa and how Africa is seeing them. And at least I don't want to go into the fact that there are at least 6 perspectives that I have seen where the way Africans view Europe. And I always say that development won't change until we begin to understand the perspectives with which we view each other. Now, the monies coming from Europe and from other places should at best, even if we continue to rely on them, and I believe we shouldn't, and I've said it in forums in Brussels, stop sending us development money. It's not helping us. Let us build. We have the right sort of network. We have the right knowledge systems. We have the right researchers. We have the right investors. We have the right players in the ecosystem. And until we move forward towards what I call productive systems, it was my good friend and scholar, Professor Eric Stam, who once said that, the whole goal of all the things we're doing in building ecosystems and the outcome of healthy ecosystems isn't just projects or some mere startups or some innovations, but actually productive entrepreneurship. That's the way he calls it. And it is where we see these projects in themselves replicating social value and impact beyond the initial funds that went into them. And let me end on this note. I don't do projects because I want to score points and I want to demonstrate some kind of mega impact. And I have some of my team members on this call today. every project that we have participated in are taken as products that must be built, refined, and scaled. If I don't see scalability in it, I don't do it. And that has become a values-based way for me to choose what I get involved in and what I don't get involved in. Because I'm no longer in this because I want to score points for myself or for my organization. I'm now in this because I can see what can robustly evolve and be scaled to build things. And a good example of that is a project that we also worked with Sociocapital on a couple of years ago. Sharon, you remember that project we worked on? The data I'm getting today is that project has now onboarded over 40,000 learners. Now, we could have started, yes, 40,000. And I'm not talking of Nigeria, I'm talking of Pan-African learning system. And the conversation is not even that we have 40,000 learners, because that's a quantitative metric. It's a qualitative dimension of it, that conversations are now going on, and that product has now been taken into universities, and that the original funder is now working with key universities across the spine of Africa, from North Africa to Southern Africa, to take what we designed, to take it into universities across Africa, to start working with young people. Now, that's the kind of next steps we're talking about. So we're not just talking about doing it and let it be we scored a point, but we now begin to build it. And now we're having investors coming in to say, what can we do with this to continue to scale the impact and to continue to systematize it? And until we begin to do this sort of things, I think we'll continue to run into the same problem that Dr. Okere, shared earlier.
All right, thank you, Adewale, for that insight. So, making reference to your last comments on the project that we had worked together, there was a form of co-creation, right, during the production of that project. So, how do we, because a lot of times we go divergently, funders have different agenda, governments have short-term scoring points, projects that they want to work on, and all of that. Where can we come together? How do we create some form of co-creation so that we are addressing pain points, we are satisfying the government, we are satisfying the beneficiary, we are satisfying the funder? Because I feel like that is the core of any form of sustainability impact that we may want to achieve. I think maybe you could throw more light or some suggestion around co-creation.
Thanks, Sharon. For me, the principle of co-creation comes down to the notion of equitable partnerships. Now, in developing these projects, and maybe some of the other speakers might also have this experience, if we're not careful, there seems to be this imbalance of power in how these projects are designed to function. That was why we had the Local Content Act a while ago, to try to reduce this, power balance. And we can start to say things like, well, if you're going to do a project, we must have at least a percentage of participants being, local citizens who are based in a particular part of the community, to help see that things are going on that way. Sharon, co-creation, the lack of co-creation has resulted into so many problems. It has resulted in mismatch between solutions, interventions, and policy. It has resulted in colonization, what I call data colonization. You collect data from a community, and then you extract the data out of the community devoid of context. And so you are analyzing data without context. And we know that when you analyze data devoid of its context, errors will be abound, because data says something, context says another thing, and we have to learn to convert data into wisdom. How do we convert data into wisdom? You can't convert data into wisdom without leveraging the power of those who are on the ground. So you can't effectively co-create without a philosophy of trust, without an underpinning of equitable partnerships. And in my own view, in moving this whole thing forward, there is this notion of transparency that must happen. Transparency, justice. I call it data justice. We are having situations where we have turned our communities into data collection points, and we rape them of data and we then use them to score points globally, get funding, and it's just a whole mess. The whole system is a mess. And I think that until we begin to allow communities own their data, until we begin to change our narrative around how, government officials, so when we have meetings, government officials, development partners, institutions, higher education institutions, organizations like your good selves, the civil society organizations are all equitable partners on the table. Everyone should have a voice because what we all bring to the table, they're unique. And those insights are needed. Nobody has the entire ingredients to make this whole project work. We all need to bring our collective to the table. And so the power of co-creation, Sharon, as you're saying, is just fundamentally driven in the mindset of how we even design the projects in the first place. And so until we begin to revisit some of these design philosophies and design ideologies, it won't work. So again, quick final point very quickly, so I don't take the time. I was having this discussion with a very senior figure in Brussels a couple of months ago, and I said something to him. I said, whenever you work, so I had to write a book on this, which we shared with them. And I said that whenever you're working with, partners in Africa, and I told them, I said, the people whom you are sending in to be the diplomats to represent you, how knowledgeable are they about Africa? He was stunned. I said, you see, you are making policies for a people you don't know. And then the question is, what data are you building your interventions on? So you send a young diplomat into Nigeria from Belgium. You tell this diplomat that, oh, women are dying at an unprecedented rate. Well, we get it that there's some data out there, but what is the real story? What is the real experiential capital that you have to back up what you're trying to do? He was stunned, and we left it this way. You can't continue to build for a people you don't know. Connection is really what builds, transformation. And without that connection, we're going to continue to have problems. So co-creation is absolutely critical. And the way we worked with you on that project, there was no such thing as we are superior to you. It is equitable partnerships. Everybody brings great value to the table, and we're all equal on the table. Thanks, Sharon.
All right, thank you, Adewale, for that insight. So we've had insight from private sector, we've had insights from institution. Nsikan has a step in or a seat with government, and that we want to hear from her. So as already established, we know that a lot of reform efforts lose traction after laws have been passed or after tenures have elapsed. So my question to you, Nsikan, now is what mechanisms can ensure continuity between legislative intent, institutional implementation, as well as citizen accountability, so that this inclusive governance that we are talking about, or this inclusivity that we are talking about, becomes a sustained system rather than just a one-off achievement that ends either at the end of the project cycle or at the end of the government in power at that particular time.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this very important conversation. And I say this because I have worked on legal frameworks for the past 15 years and also been involved in reform coordination of laws. And one of the things I have always observed is that gap between when a law is passed, the implementation, there's always that disconnect between the legislative intent and real world outcomes. And this is something we see over and over and over again. And, a lot of the speakers have already addressed some of the causes, and some of the reasons why this exists. And so in trying to, design or to determine what measures would work best for us as Africa, I mean, it's important to maybe just highlight a few of these challenges that we see within the space. Things like, policy design flaws. Sometimes you see legal frameworks that are not even properly designed. Maybe there was this massive project with, oh yes, we need legislative backing to get things going, and then the law comes out, but then it's so flawed that it can't be implemented. Then you have things like, the resource constraints, issues like, there's no funding, available as a result of, maybe government. And just as the first speaker had mentioned, Dr. Okere, sorry, within the planning of, funding, you can't scale, because once that whoever had, put in place some funding for that leaves, maybe there's no funding to push that further. And then, of course, there are also stakeholder resistance here and there. And then, most importantly, the shifting government priorities that come from time to time. We have different agendas coming, at different points. And so I personally would say that in looking at the measures that we would need from a legislative point of view, is to look at to go back to the institutions. Law in itself is just a tool for governance. And I think oftentimes when we think that, once we have that legislative backing, everything moves, it's always the greatest blunder, because in making the law, you have to also take into cognizance all the other components that are relevant for, the implementation, and to ensure that we have good outcomes. And so I see one of the things that I think we must always have, particularly from the legal point of view, is a legislative impact assessment. So you want a legal framework to sort of drive whatever reform. You need to do a legislative impact assessment. And I think the previous speakers have spoken to this, that we can't work in isolation. So that legislative impact assessment, what it does is you're looking at the economic impact, the social impact, the mainstreaming, gender, inclusivity, etc. You are now also looking at operationality of that legal framework. Will it work or won't it work? You're looking at things like, do we have the relevant technology? Do we have the resources in terms of capacity? Is government even putting these things as priorities within the next 4 or 5 years, before we even begin the journey of drafting that legislation? And then in the course of drafting the legislation, I know the National Assembly has the Nigerian Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, and they have researchers in there who from time to time receive bills to sort of look inward and look at the impact of those bills. But how much information from that can feed back into, these legal frameworks to help with implementation? And so this is a major challenge. And to help with this, we also have to look at things like, capacity building. When a law is in place and you don't have people who have understanding of the legislative intent, you're going to have problems with connecting the dots. And so you're not going to see implementation the way you want it. And then another important point I must mention is people are working in silos, and it's very dangerous. And I know the second speaker had addressed this. The challenge with working in silos, particularly in a space, a country, a fragile state like ours, is you're not going to see any tangible outcomes. As long as everyone is trying to get something done in a specific sector, and there's no coordination. I know now we have a reform coordination office in the office of the SGF, but I mean, I don't know if that is enough. What we would expect to see is, how even as CSOs, we can come together to ensure that we're not working, at different points. That way, we're not going to see implementation of these frameworks. Another important point before I wrap up is the implementation framework itself. So when you have a legal framework, and this is to say that, and I must mention before I go into the implementation framework, that the legislative impact assessment framework must be done in 3 stages. One must be done before that law is even drafted. That's when you'll identify, what ministries, department, agencies, cascading it all the way down to local government level, decentralizing, who exactly is working, will work on what. At that point, you may not know everything, which is possible. So in the course of drafting the legislation, at the midpoint, again, you would have another impact assessment. And at that point, you have already identified some policy decisions that are going into that legal framework. So now each of those decisions should be correct. What that assessment does is it helps you to look at each of those points to say, what are the challenges you will face along the way? systemic challenges that you would face along the way. I mean, if you say, okay, I want to go and establish I want to ensure that levies in a certain market are paid this way, you're going to ask some questions. Do we have the technology? How are we going to ensure accountability? Do we have grievance mechanisms so that if people are, seeking justice for whatever is going on in that market, there are some agents of justice along the way. So there's a lot that goes into that. Then after the bill is passed, then comes the point of post-legislative scrutiny. And I'm happy that I know that the WFD has been pushing for this. And now we have in Oyo State, and I think Delta, and there's a unit in the National Assembly focusing on post-legislative scrutiny. And what is post-legislative scrutiny? It enables the legislature to look at the law after it's being passed and assented by the president or the governors to say, okay, what has been done with regards to implementation? Because another thing is, if the people who have drafted and prepared the laws don't know the indicators to be looking out for, then what oversight can then be given, after those laws are passed? So these are some of the disconnects we see within the governance spaces. And we all know the issues around anti-corruption and the importance of putting safeguards within frameworks. And one other point would be ensuring that, in building the implementation framework, we are clear, because after you have done your your legislative impact assessments, it would help you with your implementation framework. It's often never the best to just be starting the implementation framework after the legislation has been assented. It's sometimes best to start thinking of it as we are curating the legal framework, because what then happens is you're doing some research into some of those spaces. What are the systems that work? Administrative constraints in those places. What are the challenges between that office? Are there many setbacks, bottlenecks? How can we address those bottlenecks? We need some form of service level agreements. Are we going to need to, redesign how the units or organization will work in terms of the ministries, department, agencies of government, etc. And taking it all the way down to the grassroots. At the grassroots level, there should be some level of accountability. Who will work on what? Who is working? Who is responsible for what? Let's not just stop at the minister shall, which is what we often see in the legal framework. And then after that, nobody knows what the implementation is all about. If you have a very robust implementation framework, and with the post-legislative scrutiny that is going out now, there are options. One is to include clauses in the legal frameworks that say, once this legislation, within this set time, implement certain things ought to be done. Because we are already in a space where we know that we don't keep to time, And then the other option is to have units within the various houses of assembly, the Senate, the House of Reps, within the committees, PLS units, where they can be close follow-ups, with legal frameworks to say, okay, now this law has been passed. Who is now responsible? Whose desk does it go to? Because at the end of the day, that's what counts. Where does this law go to? So I think I'll stop at that point, so I'm not taking too much. But let's move on to the next point, because I wanted to mention something around citizens' engagement, but I know in the course of the conversation that will come up as well.
Right. That in-depth insight. So you had mentioned something around silos. So what steps can we take? While you mentioned silos, you also mentioned about these frameworks not stopping at just the government level. We are going to the citizens themselves in the communities. So how do we get all these stakeholders, development partners, government, beneficiaries within the community, and all of them to work together? It may appear cumbersome in the process of developing the framework, but there needs to be a way around it so that the interests are represented fairly. And in the event that projects need to be carried out, or some level of development need to be carried out, the last mile receiver of this or beneficiary of this project, they are able to also make government or the development agency accountable for the progress they have seen. They are all, because they are also a part of it, they are able to say, okay, these are the suggestions we can bring to the table to ensure that even after you have gone, we can carry it on ourselves. So how do we marry these different stakeholders so that we don't fall out or we don't continue working in silos?
Thank you so much for asking that. Let me start off with the fact that there has to be ownership by all key stakeholders, because we all have to be seeing the same vision. We all should know what the outcomes should be. However, in bringing in the stakeholders, what is really important is at the very beginning, there should be a very well done stakeholder mapping across board. And now you may not have to engage all of them at the same time. You may need to put them in several categories. But what is crucial is transparency in the process. People need to know. People don't like surprises. Yeah, I mean, if you want to bring in something into a legal framework or bring in a policy, it's important for people to know. There's no need to try to keep some people out just because you think they're going to fight it. It's better to negotiate. So one of the key things to do is to develop what we call a big tent approach. You bring everyone into the room. And by everyone, not that, I'm trying to say this because sometimes the stakeholders might really be a lot. So you may need to put them in categories and then have those discussions as you're moving on with the legal framework, with the review of the legal framework. So for us as within NASSBER, when we started off in 2016, NASSBER is a partnership between the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable. Sorry, it's a partnership between the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, National Assembly, and the Nigerian Bar Association section of business law. And then what we did was we saw the need for partnership, and that's important because we were trying to help out with improving Nigeria's business environment and also ensuring that we can achieve global competitiveness. So partnership is important. A proper stakeholder mapping, developing a big tent approach, having them in proper categorizations that ensure that there is feedback. People are aware of each stage of what's going on with the policy decisions that have been approved or that you'll be going on with in that legal framework. It's also important to, look at it from the point of view. And let me give a typical example because sometimes I think it helps. The gender, there was a time when we had this gender equality bill that was for a long time in the National Assembly, and I think it's still there. And then a time came when we said we have to call it the gender equity bill because, of course, there were some people who were not comfortable with having it as gender equality. And these are some of the issues, when you look at the cultural values, societal values. So one of the things we did at that point, and this is to say that the bill had already been in the National Assembly, was to say, who are the stakeholders now at this point that need to come in? We started thinking of the religious leaders, right? The imams, the pastors, people who on a good day, you may want to just put them in one category, but now the time had come to bring them in to explain further, the importance of that law and to give them an understanding, because what happens is there's an interpretation people have of laws and it might not be the same across board. And so it's important to continuously engage. You must not at any time, say, okay, this group of people are not, it looks like they don't want this thing. Always make an effort. And I think we've seen that with the work going on with the Presidential Fiscal Tax Policy Reform Committee or team, where he has sort of engaged various stakeholders at different points, the media, the accountants, the the tax collector, etc. He's ensured that he's cascaded downward. And I know there are even some groups that may still feel, oh, maybe we've not been reached. And they still, before, I'm sure everything would be done before January 1st to ensure that all stakeholders are covered. So that's one way to bring people in. Another way to do it is advocacy, because while we may bring people into the room to discuss, sometimes they don't take the information back to their communities. So we have people sitting in a room, they've eaten, they've ticked the box. We had 100 people across different sectors, they've done this. They all go back, and then you hear someone say, oh, I heard I heard they did this, I'm not aware. I've heard that severally in development spaces, oh, I'm not aware that that was done. Or someone says, oh, I didn't know about it. Why? Because sometimes the information was given to specific people who didn't cascade. They didn't take it, beyond the room. So advocacy is very crucial. Pre and post legislation, we must have advocacy so people understand what you're trying to do, the legislative intent, your implementation strategies, your plans. How would this be beneficial to the common man? Because at the end of the day, that is what is crucial. How would businesses benefit from it to improve Nigeria's GDP? How will citizens benefit from this? How will people who feel that they need some form of inclusion, people living with disabilities, gender inclusion, etc., how are we sure we're carrying them along? So advocacy must happen across and at all times. I think I should stop there. I feel like I've said a lot at this point.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So we see that at the core of all of this that we've talked about, if we want to really streamline it, we are looking at systems integrity. So I come back to you, Dr. Adewale. You had mentioned that you usually will not get involved in projects where there are no sustainability. For me, I feel that is some form of systems integrity you are trying to put in place for your organization. And so seeing that in the African context, short-term project success they oftentimes overshadow this systemic integrity. So how can leadership serve as the organizing force that holds inclusive and sustainable systems together, in ensuring that there is both moral and measurable positive outcome of this social impact?
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you also, Nsikan, for those very insightful thoughts that you shared earlier. To this point, Sharon, unfortunately, with leadership, what leaders do not understand is that they model what the society values. It is so apparent in how leadership values. If leadership values short-termism, we will see that as a prevailing notion in how citizens engage with the government. There's always that whole thing of what's in it for me now? What am I going to get out of it now? And there's nothing wrong with wanting immediate returns, but there's something problematic about when immediate returns becomes the prevalent way of thinking, that we don't have any long-term, mid to long-term orientation. Virtue, in my view, having done research on ethics for a long time, virtue is an infrastructure. It is not just something that we take lightly. Virtue is infrastructure. And if virtue is infrastructure, it means that it is the critical enabler for all the things that we want to see that powers integrity in our systems. If we look at the way that I've just said that what the government or what the leadership values is what the community and the society would also value. Let's not be mistaken that it rubs off on the polity in many interesting ways. So a good example of this is when we look at the Nigerian national budget, for example, we look at our budget and we begin to look at allocations in that budget to critical infrastructure and critical social needs, whether it is education or healthcare. And we begin to realize that, in actual fact, the money that is being allocated for education in our national budget is not as much as the budget that is being allocated to some other things that we may borderline call those things mundane. Then it becomes clear to the citizen, nobody cares about me. So when we're doing projects, and I'm sure Dr. Austin would have experienced this, I have taken money into a community before. A community we want to help to build borehole that will supply them water. And the chief of the community and the members of the community looked at me in my face and said, bros, don't bother. Just give us the money. Now, the question is, where is that thinking coming from? Anytime they see people in shirt and tie, we have become cash cows in those communities, and we don't blame them, because it has also become a situation where many people go into these places, they collect data from them, snap pictures of their communities, and go and splash them on some fancy report that is spread across, the place. And then, we're using these guys to score cheap points on how we went to this village and how we did this and how we did that. So their eyes are now open. The day I went to do one of these works, I was told point blank that a certain international development organization had come to visit them, and that they had collected data, taken pictures, and they had promised to give them some money, never give them the money. So when you're talking about systems integrity, Sharon, it is about virtue as a critical infrastructure. It is the fact that we can't even begin to change things until we begin to model the change. It's just a bit sad that even our governments, we can't put the responsibility on the government alone. Let's not say it's government all the time. It's also us. Those of us interacting through this project, at least some of the fundings that have come through, we won't say government intervened in the funding for us to get the funding. We put applications into grants. They released funds to us. How did we treat the end users? How did we co-create with the communities? What was our orientation? Was it just about the money to keep cash flow, or was it genuinely about the people? Now, if we continue to ask these very critical questions, are we really in this for the people, or are we in it for our own sustenance? Because we know that cash is tight. And that's also one of the reasons why, for development organizations on the ground, part of, in the UK, for instance, if you're a social enterprise, one of the laws in this country, in the United Kingdom, is that you can't be a registered social enterprise unless you can prove that 51% of your annual revenue is coming through trade. You're only allowed to get 49% of your revenue from grants and donor funds. Implication is that whatever you claim you are living for, as the raison d'etre, as the French will say, or raison d'etre of your organization, must be proven to be sustainable by you beyond external funding. So 51% must come from outside. That's how you begin to ensure systems integrity, in that that whatever you are doing, you are not doing it for the short term. You are committed to it. Secondly, is that every single year, you must write a report to a specific community organization that reviews the impact of your organization. I did that with one of the organizations I work with. And guess what happened? You think they don't read it. They sent back a comprehensive response to challenge every single point on that report. You said you've done this. We have not seen this. And they challenged it, and they left it on the grounds that if you don't make adjustments by next year, your community initiative status will be withdrawn from you, because we can't see your impact on the ground. Now, at the point, I think it was Nsikan who spoke about accountability. Now, that is how you build integrity into systems. So when you have accountability, when you have virtue as an infrastructure, when we begin to move away from just using people as a means to an end, but make them the end in themselves, then we haven't started the conversation. I say this: what is social entrepreneurship in Nigeria? What's the adopted definition? What is the legal framework that backs how social enterprises in Nigeria should function? The definitions vary across countries, but what we see is that countries that have specifically put frameworks in place to guide what and how they operate tend to get better outcomes from them. So going back to the legal aspect that Nsikan mentioned earlier, until we begin to build some of these systems, law is an enabler, she rightly said. But also without the law, there's no yardstick. Without the law as the standard, there is no yardstick which we can measure integrity in our systems. So if we go back to that, then we can start to see that we will stop having this, I'm sorry to say, mushroom, social enterprises, development organizations that claim to just be popping up, but they are not held accountable to any standards. They're not held accountable to any metrics. And it's just a free for all. Everybody is starting something, but there is really no proper way to assess, measure, and actually judge what exactly is being done and how the work is being executed on the ground.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adewale, for that insight. It was very, very robust. I don't even know where to pick what to pick because there were so many points that you raised. But as we continue during this session, hopefully we'll be able to address some of these challenges that you have raised. So Dr. Okere, I'm coming to you now. So Dr. Adewale mentioned things around data integrity. Nsikan mentioned things around accountability and then a cascading of information. So in ensuring sustainability and some form of inclusive systems, all of these depend on shared access to information, whether it is data, whether it is policy, and all of that. So how can we democratize data and empower local institutions or communities to use this evidence to ensure accountability, to ensure some form of transparency, and at the end of the day, policy influence, so that we are not only going to pick data or get data and splash it all the media or whatever channel. We are making the everyday citizen accessible to this information so that they too can serve as ensuring and some form of equity.
Okay, can you hear
Over
me?
to you, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
You're muted.
Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And it's insightful to hear from Nsikan and Adeyinka with regards to these contexts in terms of intersections of what we are looking at. Specifically, what I'm getting seriously that I think are key points that would reemphasize it or maybe help me to answer the question that you have raised is regards to trust, as well as in terms of evaluation of our legal framework from time to time. Very, very key. And it's nice that Professor Adewale focused again on the integrity aspect. These are all components that I believe are embedded into how we do community engagement. The reason why it's important about how we do community engagement, because that's where the data points for whatever intervention, whatever we want to do in terms of engagement, even in terms of how we go about in terms of the development outcomes. It's very, very important as to how we do develop community engagement. And the problem around how we do community engagement, both as organizations on the ground, in quotes, as well as government systems, is problematic. And the reason why it's problematic, because these, again, remember I said that these are the areas where these data points will actually come from. The challenge around what we do, particularly in terms of, I'll speak in the research terms, what research does is most times to look at your people that you're engaging with, look at them as subjects and not as objects of research. You should look at them as subjects and not as objects of research. That is clearly. So the moment we have that thinking in terms of how we go about in terms of doing community engagement, it helps in terms of interpreting and understanding the data point as well as the community engagement strategies. And I'll speak particularly in terms of the budgetary systems that we actually commit, the resources that we commit to community engagement, both in terms of institutions as well as in terms of government organizations. Let me start with government organizations area. Most times you see that if you look at the budget line of a lot of ministries, departments, and agencies with regards to how they itemize or detail community engagement, it's just like a straight line. We want to meet social community, social time, and we budget X amount for it. There is no systematic framework in terms of going back to evaluate as to how far, how well, what were the specific outcomes from those community engagement systems. And the same also applies with institutional development organizations, CBO, CSO, and the rest of them. Whenever we pick it in terms of, oh, we'll do community engagement, we'll map them out, we'll do everything with them. But then what are the frameworks in place for us to come back and evaluate as to how successful, how evident, or what have we been able to move the needle from point A to point B with regard to community engagement? And it's important because this helps us to understand them, not just understand the context, we understand as data points. Because in the end, we are also communicating whatever intervention, whatever we have done, back to these communities that we are working in terms of development outcome. They need to see it. They need to see it clearly. So for instance, if you call them for example, a meeting that has to do with an impact in terms of climate change, you gather community stakeholders, political leadership structures, gender groups or women groups, youth groups, and then you have the conversation. You now get them in a meeting, the whole drinks, the whole presentation, beautiful, and then go back and start designing flashcards and everything, do all the beautiful things. Most times that is where it ends. We don't have systems in place to come back and evaluate as, okay, how did this community engagement strategy lead or impact what we are designing? And again, how did it also, to a large extent, how is it going to impact onto what we are going to do what we want to do going forward? Additionally, how are they going to be carried along at different levels of that implementation? Because like I said, these are specific data points that are very, very important. In fact, with the NESG, I was able to come up with some thinking around the need for us to review and revisit how we do our community engagement systems. Because it's necessary, because these are not just only data points, they are destinations for our development outcomes. They are also subjects of our development programs and projects. And it's very, very interesting to look at that. The next point I'd like to stop at is, how then do we communicate in terms of what we do, both as organizations, both as government systems? And the fact is, and the reason why I'm interested in communication is I'm from a technical background in terms of technical writing and everything. But because most times what we are saying is not only going to be used at that technical level, there is need to start thinking around how then do we communicate those technicalities, those special terms, to people that would understand and then run with it. In sum, clearly, when it comes to CBOs and CSOs, there's a popular saying that we cannot do what government is meant to do, but we can help people in terms of communities to be able to point to them and say, okay, this is what your government is meant to do for you, and then help them to ask the right questions. So for us to be able to communicate those technicalities and show those gaps to the communities that we are serving, it helps them to a large extent to be able to engage not just with government, but also engage with external funders, engage with the broad range of stakeholders. So it's more like how we look at in terms of the communication of our knowledgeable products, and again, in terms of how we look at community engagement, how we do it in terms of how we design it. And I'd like to end to this point. It's necessary to note that On the government side, and I'm always interested on the government side because I look at how economics and politics kind of mix a lot to a large extent. The reason why I'm saying this is we have different regional development commissions that have been set up. How are these community engagement systems going on? We are not hearing anything about it. What are the roles being played by CSOs, CBOs in the design and implementation of the, we're not hearing. And remember, these organizations are regional based. So when you now start seeing development outcomes from these organizations, there's need to now, if there are no strings to tie it back to the community engagement, then I believe that is flawed. And that's why we need to review all these things, particularly from part of community engagement and how we communicate our knowledgeable products, because these are essential data points that we can use to scale as well as we can use to engage further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okere. So if I hear you clearly, there is a feedback, there's a gap in feedback loop, especially during the process of community engagement, and as well as what Nsikan earlier mentioned around policy frameworks. So how, Nsikan, I'll come to you. So how can we institutionalize a feedback loop based on our community engagement processes, based on some of these policy frameworks and formulations that have already been carried out or that are on ground, and then get the legislature to review and ensure that national priorities reflect these realities on ground and ensure that they can lead to some long-term impacts.
Okay, thank you very much for that very thoughtful question. And I think Dr. Adewale and Dr. Okere have addressed most of the points. So for me, when I look at the aspect of feedback, feedback is good, but feedback must communicate. It must communicate to the legislator. So what we've seen oftentimes is people just pull together documents. We're unhappy, a community pulls information. We were promised this, or this project was done. It's all lumped in and sent to the National Assembly, right? Then you ask yourself, so who is going to sit and do all the analysis, understanding what the community is all about, the context of the problem, etc. So that's where we as organizations can begin solving the problem, finding ways where we can ensure translation, of this feedback first, in ways that are easily understood by the legislature, by even the executive, and even, when we say feedback, I always see it as a two-way thing, sorry, because as much as they are all there and we're giving them feedback, they are there for us, right? So we also need to also receive from them feedback on, okay, so now that you are aware of what's happening or what's going on in this particular space, how do you people want to resolve it? So also government has to also have that framework for giving back information to the littlest community in Nigeria. And so we ask ourselves, do we have this currently? And to what extent is it being utilized? So I know that with regards to, and I mean, I'll delve into data because I think that a lot of it still boils down to that. Data integrity, I think Dr. Adewale had touched on that, is very crucial. The information that comes back, on now that we have post-legislative scrutiny, it means the legislature has a framework. I mean, let's imagine this gets done in pilot states of 6 or maybe 36 states in the end. They would have a framework which they would use to say, okay, this particular legal framework was done. We want to know in terms of implementation, 1, 2, 3, this community, what is being done. And then the information from that then goes back as a feedback. So post-legislative scrutiny for me is one of the ways that they can use for feedback. Another thing I observed is, I think the UK has that, I'll need to confirm again, but they have this guidance on routes for academic engagement with the government. And I think it's very important because a lot of us are doing research But how much of this research goes back to government in ways that they can understand? So we have in almost all institutions of government, what we call planning, research, and statistics units. But then I'm not certain, and I'm not going to speak to that, of what is being done there. I can see Dr. Adewale is smiling, but yes, I'm not going to speak to what goes on there. But what I think we can do is, in establishing, this type of offices where research, well, data-driven, with integrity, etc., data is being sent to specific sectors, right? So we have, for instance, the health sector, an established unit that receives evidence-based research on what is going on in some key, let's say it could be health institutions, it could have to do with broadly, maybe primary health care, but they receive that information. Now, when they receive that information, the question is, and this is where the systems come in, what do they do with that information? Now, we want a situation where that information can be translated to become data-driven policy advisory. So let's say that unit now translates that information and then there's a system within those offices that ensures that it gets to the executive, and these issues are discussed. And then we are also monitoring and tracking. Why is this important? Because at the end of the day, I think information, if we are doing a lot of research, we are doing a lot of data gathering, the decision makers is still government, right? We should ensure that this information is getting to them. And then it's getting to them. And we're also tracking to know, okay, so now you have this information. How are you translating it into policy? If they say, we've received this, but we don't think it's, we may have to do some further research or maybe receive further feedback to know. But that is what exists as community engagement to me. Because at the end of the day, government should be involved in the day-to-day of what's going on in with citizens. And unfortunately, sometimes it seems like if it doesn't get through the federal, you're wasting your time, if you pass it through state. But let's imagine that as organizations, we work together to ensure that this type of units exist in institutions, right? And we have close, technical meetings with them to say, okay, yes, so we've received a badge of, well, in fact, sorry to really digress, but we churn out a lot of research every year. If we are to do statistics of how much information we churn out, what are we doing with it as a nation? So we're seeing how other countries are saying, look, we have a guidance note. There's a need. If you have if you're a research organization, you're a CSO, or you have some data, this is how you channel it to the government institutions through these ministries, departments, and agencies. And then we will ensure that it cascades and we ensure effective implementation using that information. And I think for me, that is very, very important. Another point I think we need to also look into is around, and I know I've mentioned it before, it's the assessment, the impact assessment. We must know what we're measuring. Because oftentimes we go in to measure. We get the information, and then so what's your measurement supposed to do? What's it supposed to do for the legislature? What is it supposed to do for the executive? What is it supposed to do for the judiciary, right? What is it supposed to do for the citizens? Because if we don't understand this, we will just churn out a set of information without contextualizing it for relevance for each of these arms of government. And so in doing this, it also helps, for instance, the National Assembly with data-driven decision-making. It's important for them to have information feedback. And that's why I think now they're trying to really, they have legislative oversights, but that in itself has its own problems. And I don't blame it on the National Assembly fully, because a lot of funding goes into, if you make a complaint today of an oil spillage in Ogoni land, right? And you complain to a certain House of Reps member, your thinking is he's going to fly down there with a team of some committee members to do some inspection or send. Where will the funds come from? You know, those are things that we haven't even considered. So we need to start building frameworks that can ensure that we make oversight not look like a burdensome thing where you need to have some government institution buy your ticket for you to go to do the oversight. We need to make oversight easy. We now have technology. Let's use it. You know, let's be able to even have, we should be able to cascade units. I know that even though we work as a system of federal, state, and local government, but there should be units that can help with oversight without having you leave your table. That even provides some even more tangible information, you know. And so this for me is one of the ways I think we can also help. Finally, and I think this is what we also try to do within the NESG and NASSBER, is the importance of post-legislative advocacy. So once a legislation is passed, we would usually have what we call a workshop. It could be a workshop, it could be a webinar, where we bring in the key players into the room to discuss, and that's including the regulator if it has regulatory components, the implementers in the spaces. If it's something, of course, the lawyers would be there, depending on the field, right? And then the idea is to listen to everyone to know, okay, this bill was passed in 2020. This is 2023. What are your observations? And you would get concrete feedback. Everyone is in the room sharing and they know the information. People take back the feedback. We give you, you know, we give this feedback to each and every stakeholder. And then you follow up to ensure that whatever needs to be done to ensure effective implementation is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nsikan. That was quite insightful. We are a few minutes past the top of the hour. So in conclusion, I would like Dr. Adewale and Dr. Okere to just provide their perception and their feedback on based off of what Nsikan has just shared, because I see a lot of acquiescing. I see a lot of thought process that is going on while she was speaking. So just as a form of wrap up, before we go to the question and answers, could you just provide some form of insight? I'll start with you, Dr. Adewale.
Right, thank you, Sharon, and as an ode to Ms. Nsikan for again very wonderful sets of submissions. I think for me, in wrapping all of this together, it comes down to this: we now need to begin to think end to end, and in doing that, we need to have a clear pathway, almost similar to like stakeholder mapping system. It comes down to how we design our innovation ecosystem. You know, we have this multiple ecosystems, and if I pick up on what Nsikan was saying earlier, our innovation ecosystem in Nigeria can be more effective than what it is at the moment. And the innovation ecosystem tries to bridge together two economies. It tries to bridge the research economy with the market economy. And knowledge that is created is translated into practical market realities. That innovation ecosystem, at the core of it, is the engine room of knowledge creation, our university systems. And the power of this must be such that unless we begin to think systems across board, so whether we look at our development initiatives, as we've discussed, we're talking about systems there, we're talking about building integrity into systems, we're talking about providing standards for which those systems operate, whether through law or through practical frameworks or tools that are approved by government to say that any project being carried out must meet this sort of criteria. At the end of it is also to look at the different systems that we can put in place to power a functioning sort of development narrative. I see it almost like a human body. You have the digestive system, the nervous system, the respiratory system. You have all these systems. The complexity of these systems is also what makes a human function. Similarly, we must begin to see this conversation we're having as a multi-system intervention. We've spoken about the project systems and the and the implementation systems for projects. We're also now touching on the innovation systems. And for me, if I just anchor my final point on that, it is this. that, Nsikan was talking about the UK and some of the knowledge to practice sort of frameworks we have. Well, we have quite a few of them. And the power of them is that, for example, I know that we have the university's policy engagement framework, call it UPenn. It is the one that connects academics to policy needs, and it shares those resources on how they can achieve policy impact. We have systems that train academics on how to write for policymakers. The closest we have in Nigeria to that is the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. I've done some work with the NESG as a senior fellow a couple of years ago, and I know that the work that is being done in NESG is beyond. They bring in amazing academics from across the world, Nigerians who are doing great work, and then they get us to engage directly with practical problems on the ground and design research interventions that have strong policy implications. It takes a skill to do that because academics can be lost in their own world. So to translate knowledge into policy is a totally different set of skills. And there is a capabilities framework that we have in the UK. It's called Capabilities in Academic Policy Engagement, CAPE, that is designed specifically to help explore how we can create that supportive engagement between academics and policy professionals, including governments, in order to sort of power knowledge to practice interventions. And of course, we also know we have knowledge transfer partnerships and accelerated knowledge transfer systems where we have Innovate UK, which many of us know of. And those programs in Innovate UK connect businesses with public sector organizations with academic experts, to apply innovative research, ideas and research to practical problems. Again, these are all systems that have been designed to feed knowledge into the broader system. So I think we need to begin to think of designing a big multi-system approach that doesn't oversimplify things, but embraces the complexity and the fact that it is the multiple systems and the complexities of those multiple systems that actually power a fully functional nation, just like the way human beings function with multiple systems in their complexities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adewale. Over to you, Dr. Okere.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adewale, as well as Nsikan, for trying to do all in terms of connecting all what we have said today. I would like to end with this, and I think Dr. Adewale and I were in spirit because there was something I wrote down while he was talking, and it's trying to link the educational framework in Nigeria, as well as how this links to academics, in terms of also how it links to problem solving at the planning and policy level. Because we're looking at that systems that we spoke of, we need to be intentional around investing in such systems, also in terms of nurturing those systems. And the intentionality here, I don't want to focus so much, or I think it shouldn't be on external intentionality. It's more like practical intentionality at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, and even at the community level. How are we thinking around investment into those systems? Even if they don't exist, how are we thinking around creating them and then funneling necessary resources towards sustaining them? It's very, very essential, because if we go ahead and continue talking about these things without properly linking them, even in terms of the resources needed, even in terms of the architecture needed, it would end up having this conversation continuously, back to back. And it's very, very important to consider these things at different levels. And I would also want to hint a little on what Nsikan talked about with regards to the point she made in terms of evaluating legal frameworks that are in place that helps to strengthen these systems. It's one thing to have those legal frameworks out there, but then it's necessary to also come back and now start saying that these legal frameworks that we have designed, are they helping us to get where we want? If they are not, what can we do about it? If they are, how can we improve upon them? It's necessary to consider this from this angle, because I feel that the more we do this, the more we can bridge those gaps and the more we can work closely to development outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that succinct summary. In its essence, it captures all of what we have discussed here today. So I'll open the floor for questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, or you can drop your questions in the chat box. But we'll just give 5 minutes for the question and answer session. since we are over 10 minutes past the hour, so that we don't eat so much into other people's, our speakers' time. So questions and answers, questions, please. Okay. Okay, I see Adedamola has a question. Please, can you speak, or you type your question? If unmute your mic, please, and speak. Can you hear me? Okay, so he says his question is around getting clarification on access to available resources to legal frameworks that guide social enterprises in Nigeria. So I think that would be for Nsikan to ask. And then secondly, how to answer, sorry. And then secondly, how can digital tools or local innovations help strengthen systems and make inclusion more achievable and realistic in underserved areas? So I will throw that to Dr. Okere, the second question. The first one is getting clarification on access to available resources to legal frameworks that guide social enterprises in Nigeria.
Please, do you want me to go ahead to answer?
Please go ahead, yes.
All right, okay. So thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so we have a lot of legal framework resources. You can use the one from PLAC, that's the Policy Law Advocacy Center. They have a database of legal frameworks with even legal opinions. We have within the center where we have NASSBER, but you would need to go through it's the Onishanakon Center. You can also check that out. Then I think I'm not certain of this, but I would have to confirm. I'm not sure if you can get it from Law Pavilion. I think that's a paid service, but that's another way to receive it. Then usually it could help if you are if you have some contacts in the National Assembly that can also help you if you need like hard copies of these legal frameworks. That also helps, because sometimes what might be out there might not be what is actually, the correct version of the document. So start with the Policy Law Advocacy Center. I'll see if I can put the link.
All right, thank you. Dr. Okere, the second question was, how can digital tools or local innovations help strengthen systems and make inclusions more achievable and realistic in underserved areas?
Thank you for that question. I would like to start with saying that, there are myriads or plethora of digital tools there. But then the challenge now with regards to, and these digital tools particularly I was speaking about, is from the side of the non-governmental organizations, CSO and CBOs, there are so many. And there are so many organizations doing a lot around that. But then it's more like, how can we include, I want to turn it around, how can we improve interest? Because interest is also important. Yes, there are underserved communities, but then it's how can we ignite and spark up that interest in different issues, governance issues, social inclusion issues, diversity issues, even gender issues. When we spark up those, it now helps to link up with regards to the availability of those digital tools. And this is speaking in terms of the demand side. On the supply side, in terms of on the other side of the aisle, there's also need to consider how far and how well are governance systems trying to also communicate in terms of the practicality of um, uh, most of the conversations or most of the interventions that they are doing. It's not just about bringing out budgets year in, year out, quoting millions of naira that or dollars that it's going to go into such interventions. How well are you helping people to understand that this intervention links to this development outcome, links to this? So it's not just about having documents there, but then there's all about trying to help out in terms of using digital access, digital leverages to help people to understand these things clearly. One last thing is that the area that we are talking about, underserved communities, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of geographical and maybe in terms of sociological. Geographical, those underserved community, yes, a simple person might have access to a phone, or is it a smartphone? Digital coverage also matters, because at the same time while we are bringing out innovative solutions, how are we doing it in a way that even those that are not with smartphone, having smartphone is one issue. What about internet connectivity? What about cost of paying for data? To understand these things. So there's need to start looking at what innovative ways can we use to be able to communicate, engage, as well as have more conversations around this issue and spark up that interest. Because once that interest is there, it's easy for civil society organizations and NGOs to be that bridge as much as they can while trying to link to government interventions and government plans and policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's one more question. What will you recommend as fundamental KPIs for concrete impact measurement for community projects, especially in rural areas in Nigeria? Dr. Adewale, I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Sure.
And yeah.
I can take that. Okay, so great question, by the way. So what I'll say to that is that there are project-specific outcomes that must be, taken on board in measuring or assessing impact. So what was the project initially set out to achieve, and how can we be sure that we have achieved it? So we usually have this system of outcomes, output, input that we must, measure. We call it the logic framework. There's a logic framework that must be adopted in sort of ensuring that we know exactly what we will measure. But beyond that, my thinking is that we also need to generate what I'll call broader metrics. For instance, metrics that look at some of the interconnected domains that we would typically want to look at in a rural setting, economic measures. To what extent is this thing resulting into economic empowerment, excuse me, and livelihoods, if the project so lends itself in that direction? You'll be surprised, and I know you know this. This is one of the good things or funny stories around SDGs, all 17 of them, for example, is that we don't overemphasize the interconnectivity enough. Every one of them is so intricately interconnected that by working on one, you are working on all 17 together. Because if you are working on reduce poverty levels, by reducing poverty levels, you are indirectly affecting access to food. You are indirectly affecting, partnerships for ecosystem development, amongst all the many other elements of the SD. So that interconnectivity is so important that by addressing one issue, it will have a spin-off effect on economic metrics, which can be measured. It could be measured in so many different ways. It could be about income levels, increase in income levels. It could be something that looks at effect on the core means of livelihood in that rural community. If it is farming, how is it affecting agriculture, access to market, and so on and so forth, if the projects will lend itself to that. But there's always a knock-on effect. There is the broader effect you can have on social variables. Does it influence social well-being? Does it help with better education participation, healthcare access? Does it help women, which is what we're looking at, the social inclusion element? So we have the social dimension. We have the environmental notion. I mean, in this age of sustainability, a lot of fundings are very, very finicky on ensuring sustainability, and not just the people dimension, the people, planet, elements of it. Not many of them focus on the profit component. So you have the environmental impact, very clear measures. Is it going to help with waste management? Is it going to help with carbon footprint? Then we have institutional capacity as well. How does it enable local institutions in that village, in that rural community? Is it empowering the people? Is it giving power to them to make transparent, speedy decisions? Is it helping collaboration amongst different internal local stakeholders? So we're looking at not just institutional capacity on the outside. We're looking at institutional capacities locally within these rural communities, because remember that we have a very interesting framework that powers how our communities work. Nigeria is one of those countries where we have an intersection of the old, systems of governance in kingship systems, still working with the new political order, the democratic system. So it's a hybrid system we practice. And there is a power dynamic between the local institutions and the political institutions. And cultural sensitivity and cultural intelligence 101 will tell you that one of the biggest blunders you can commit is to ignore local institutions and ignore what you call, quote, informal. And I say that with a tongue in cheek. Let us not use informal institutions outside of our own setups, because what we call informal is informal to those who think they've created standards to make it informal. It is informal to you, but it is formal to us. A susu is informal to you, but that is how we've always done things. So it is formal to us. So let's not call what is formal to us informal in the name of wanting to sound politically correct. So institutions, very important. And finally, is the ethics and the culture and the relational capital that comes in, how we build trust. That by the outcomes, have we built trust? The question for that, Adedamola, is that I always say this: can I return to that community, and will I be welcomed openly by them? We should not become one project wonders. Would we want to return to a community and they will bring out the dancing troops to say they've come again, this time let's expect better, because of the impact that we've had? So that would be my sort of summary on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much to our speakers. We honestly appreciate you, and we are grateful that you took out time out of your busy schedule to join us during this webinar. So as part of what we do, this particular webinar is part of what we do in one of our portfolio in Sociocapital, what we call the Sociocapital Inclusive Development. And our desire is, or our aim is, to unlock potentials of individuals and communities to access social services. And we design and implement several kinds of solutions that aims to advance the broader human capital development and in addressing a total inclusive development for whichever community or institution we are looking at. We are looking at agency, we are looking at autonomy, we are looking at access, and our core service areas are strengthening systems, shaping equitable access, scaling markets, creating innovations in the process, supporting community systems. And to enable us do this, we provide solutions around inclusive financing, research and learning, institutional capacity strengthening, expanding access, human capital development, as I mentioned earlier, community and household economic strengthening. So these are all of the things that we put in place that help us to address some of the issues that have been raised in today's discussion. And we approach this by ensuring that we encourage social resilience. We make capital markets work for the poor. We are not just talking about it. We are going into communities, identifying unique opportunities within those communities and working with those community members to co-create options for them to explore the markets that is within them. We also do this by using technology to close the system gaps in this service and in ensuring service access and quality, and ensuring at the end of the day that there is sustainable growth and blended value. So thank you very much once again for joining us. To our participants who fully joined us during this session, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a blessed weekend. Thank you, and bye for now.